Hi, I hope you can hear me. It's a very funny headset. My name is Tom Winnifrith, and I'm here to talk about MySquare, which is the #1 fraud on AIM. From years before the company floated, from the flotation process, from its life on AIM, this company has been committing fraud. Now, I know that people on bulletin boards say that I accuse all sorts of companies of committing fraud. That's not true. I accuse all sorts of companies of being exaggerating with RNSs, of over-egging the pudding, of failing to deliver on their promises, of running out of money and of being likely to go bankrupt. There are relatively few companies which I accuse of committing fraud. Maybe I should do it more often. Because when you make the accusation that a company is committing fraud, it is potentially libelous. You can only do so if you have hard evidence, proof that the company is committing fraud. In the case of MySquare, it is without doubt a complete and utter fraud. I have invited the company to be here, both the CEO and its PR man, Damien McChrystal. I've invited them to come here to have the right of reply. They have turned down that generous invitation from me. I wonder why. They've also neglected to sue me when I've accused them of committing fraud. That is what good fraudsters do. Fraudsters should not bother with journalists who accuse them of being fraudsters. They should concentrate on their main business at hand, which in the case of MySquare is stealing the money and issuing shares to morons. So they're doing the right thing as fraudsters. There is a slight moral dimension to this, and I know some people say that I'm only having a go at MySquare because I think they are unethical in a moral sense. That's not true, but they are. This company operates in Myanmar, what old farts like me would call Burma. You may have noticed that in Burma there is wholesale genocide. The Rohingya people are being slaughtered. The women are being raped. The kids are being clubbed to death with rifle butts and machine gunned down. The men are being murdered. Numerous times, MySquare has described what is going on, which I would describe as genocide, I would describe as war crimes, and so would you. MySquare has described that as civil unrest. To me, there is an ethical dimension to capitalism. You should not behave in that way. That's one objection. The other objection, and my principal one, is that this company has committed fraud. I start this tale back in the 1990s and 2000s, and it is the tale of Eric Shire, who is the CEO of this company. He is everything in this company. It's rather like that fraud Quindell. There's a cast of characters, but dominating it is one person. In the case of Quindell, it's Rob Terry. He's pulling all the strings. He's pulling all the levers. He is the man who drives it. In the case of MySquare, it is Eric. Back in the 1990s and 2000s, he was operating in America. He is an American. He was an American, and he was operating in America. And if you check the press cuts, you'll see that there's wholesale allegations of how he was stealing from his employees. He was not paying his bills. He was stealing from suppliers. He was not delivering goods. He was accused of fraud. By the way, the gentleman walking in there is my lawyer who defends me in all my libel cases. Nice to see you, Rudy. I'm glad you're here. So he has a track record. Leopards do not change their spots. People who are stealing on a wholesale basis and committing fraud throughout the 1990s and 2000s will still be doing it today. You or I would not go, well, I hope, Rudy's a lawyer, maybe he would steal from his clients, but you and I would not engage in that behavior. The only people who will do that are people who are hardwired to be fraudsters. So that is a bad point, and that should have made AIM refuse to admit MySquare. They should have looked at the form, looked at the character of this gentleman and said, your company is not fit to be on AIM. But of course, that didn't happen. So now we come to the prospectus 2 or 3 years ago. And this was signed off by the esteemed nomad SP Angel. SP Angel is clearly desperate for cash, so it will sign off on any old rubbish. But this prospectus took lying to a whole new art form. I quote, "In respect of the directors, there are no conflicts of interest between any duties they have to the company and their private interests and any other duties they may have." Okay, so it's perfectly clean. Except you find that Eric Shire is not only involved with MySquare, but he's chairman and CEO of a company called Rising Dragon Singapore. A few weeks before the flotation, just a few weeks before the flotation, Rising Dragon gave MySquare a $1 million credit facility. Didn't lend it $1 million, it just gave it a credit facility, the right to borrow money. For that, there's a 12% interest, and for the privilege of granting this facility, Rising Dragon, which is run and owned and controlled by Eric Shire, was given 18.7 million shares. That was worth 1.8 million at the float price. Now, 1.8 million, okay, if you're a lawyer like Rudy, you just regard that as small change. But for the rest of us, I would say that's material. That is a clear conflict of interest. So there is a clear lie in the prospectus. The prospectus is materially misleading, but it gets better. The company then persuaded its accountants, the esteemed firm of PKF Littlejohn, to sign off on what to me looks like clearly misleading accounting treatment. The arrangement fee for this particular transaction, $975,000, was booked into the balance sheet of MySquare as an asset. The $975,000 was deemed to be the arrangement fee, and MySquare booked that as an asset. Remember, it has created this asset by giving a whole load of shares to its CEO, and it's created an asset. Now, why is, you say $975,000, it doesn't really matter, it's not a lot of money? Well, actually, it does. Because even with that totally bogus asset, which is being amortized over time, the company floated with negative equity of £320,000. The balance sheet was a joke on day one, but it is only because the accountant signed off on something which no one in this room would regard as reasonable that it is even just there. The company continues. Nominally, it is in the business of developing games which people out east in Burma and other places play, generally not paying a cent to play it. They're free. You understand the business model? I give you away lots of things for free, and so have bugger all revenue, and I lose lots of money and go bust. That's the basic business model here. In order to prevent that, the company has done numerous related party deals. Most of the revenue it's booked has not been from these games, which it gives away from free, but for developing other software applications for two companies called Faster Cash and MyPay. Now, I'll give you a wild guess as to who controls and runs Faster Cash and MyPay. Yeah, it's Mr. Shire. He controls them. So he controls the companies which are nominally the largest customers of MySquared. The company has continued on the AIM casino for 2 or 3 years. Throughout that time, there have been other little red flags, such as capitalization of cost. There will be people out there who support this company which talk about its ability to generate profits. Well, yes, profits are a matter of opinion. If you capitalize costs, that is to say you don't charge them through the P&L, but instead park them on the balance sheet, then what profits you are nominally reporting, or in this case losses, bear no relation to the cash being burned. In the year ended 30th of June 2017, MySquare decided to capitalize $1.7 million of development costs on its product. Now, the rules on capitalization are pretty clear. You have to show that if you capitalize the cost on developing a product, that product is generating some revenues, or might soon generate some revenues. Except with MySquare, the product in question is largely an application, MyChat. The company has been in development, the product has been developed for 3 years and has not actually generated a cent of revenue, let alone profit. There are future projections that it might do. Well, I bet you it won't, but it's pretty aggressive. Companies which, if you study the stock market, companies which flatter their profits, or in this case, reduce their losses with aggressive capitalization costs on products which are not going to generate a cent of sales, it always ends in tears. But naturally, PKF Littlejohn, the auditors who'd signed off on the fraudulent accounts in the prospectus, waved this through. Now, the big fraud, which gives me real comfort, when I call a company a fraud, I can pick up on little things like this. I can pick up on the fact it lied in its prospectus. But, you know, we can argue about that sort of thing. What we can say, without doubt, is that the company committed a massive fraud last year. It issued a number of statements in the summer of 2017. On May the 9th, it said that its daily revenue had reached $5,000 a day, up from $3,900 in April. The bulletin board morons got very, very excited about that. The broker, Beaufort Securities, got very excited and published enthusiastic buy notes. The company said that it was partly down to its own in-house thing and partly down to third-party development work. It got better. On the 6th of June, the company said that its daily revenue had reached $7,000 a day in early June, and up from $5,000 in the start of May and $5,500 as an average for the whole of May. People were doing their charts. They were doing graphs. It's going like this. Revenue's going through the roof. Fantastic. But it got even better. On the 4th of July, the company said that in the last few days in June, revenue had reached $8,500 a day. The last few days in June, $8,500 a day, and the company was operating at break-even. Great. What's not to like? People continued to look at the chart. They extrapolated onwards. This company was going to be making a lot of money. It was at worst at break-even. If there was going to be any change in trading, the company should have notified the market. You can see by the timing of these statements and the periods they relate to that it was fully aware of what its revenues were within 48 or 72 hours of those revenues being generated. So if there was any fall-off in sales in July, it could have notified the market. It should have notified the market under AIM rules. On the 31st of July, smoked out by me breaking the news that they were doing a placing, the company finally did a placing, raising money, 1.2 million at 3.75p. There was then no news until the 11th of October. And on the 11th of October, they admitted that revenues in July, August, September had been just $135,000 a month, which, if you can work it out, is what? $4,500 a day. It wasn't that they were, it was very high in July, but fell off a cliff to absolutely nothing in August and September. They were at that level throughout July, August, and September because the company stopped doing third-party application development work for Eric Shire's other companies. He simply stopped doing that work at the end of June, so there was no work. He was aware that no work was coming in, and revenues fell off a cliff. That means that the company committed fraud, because every investor who took part in that placing believed at the very least that the company was doing $8,500 of revenue a day and it was achieving break-even. They probably thought it was doing a lot more because they looked at the graph of the trading statements and saw things going through the roof. They were misled. They bought money on a false prospectus. It actually got a lot worse than that because if you look at the interim results, which came out the other day, you will see that if revenue was at the we've seen the results for the quarter ended September 30th. The interim numbers show there was a slight pickup in revenue in the period October, November, December, and so we now know that revenue is $150,000 a day, $150,000 a month in the first half of the current financial year. If MySquare was telling the truth when it said that at $8,500 a day, it was at break even, then assuming that revenue in the 6 months to 31st of December was about $5,000 a day, the company would be losing $3,500 a day. You can do your maths on that one. So that would work out at cash burn in the first half of the financial year, the period July through to December, of $706,000. The actual cash burn in that period when we finally got the interim results was $2.21 million. That shows you the scale of the deception which this company engaged in order to get that placing away. It was wholesale fraud. One of the things the company said at the time of the placing on July 31st, 2017, was that it would never need any more money. Of course, that was a lie too. On the 7th of March this year, the company announced that it had taken out some death spiral funding, loan notes which will be converted into shares and flogged of $2.1 million. That's not surprising that it's had to do funding, because the rate of cash burn, we know in the 6 months, 31st of December, was about $2.2 million. And we find that as at 31st December, cash was down to $1.3 million, of which $800,000 is locked up in an escrow account. We've been told that sales in January, February, March were as bad as they were in the July, August, September period. So it's quite clear that without this new funding, MySquare would have gone bust by April. How on earth is the Nomad not concerned about the fact that not only did it commit wholesale securities fraud in July, but having raised that money and said it would never have to raise any money again, it was teetering on the brink of insolvency by the end of March 2018. So what's the end game? Well, the regulators in this country are fully aware of everything that has gone on at MySquare. You can see from the numbers that there is hard evidence that this company has committed fraud. You can see from the prospectus there is hard evidence that he has told massive and material lies to investors. And you can see from the CV of the CEO that he's not a very good fellow. There is everything the FSA needs to convict here. There is everything the Serious Fraud Office needs to convict. There is everything AIM regulation needs to convict. But of course, they're doing nothing. They've been presented with all the information, there's nothing happening. However, out in the Far East, things are a bit different. And the private companies of Mr. Shire have raised cash from external investors, and I believe that the regulators out there are looking at him. That's one potential possibility. If the regulators out in the Far East tighten the noose enough, maybe the regulators in this country will do something. The other possibility is that the Nomad says enough is enough. SP Angel clearly are completely morally bankrupt, or so desperate for money to pay for the coke and hookers that they will sign off on everything. They have been shown that they signed off on a prospectus which contained wholesale lies. They have been shown that they signed off on RNS statements which were untrue or misleading, and they've been shown that their client committed wholesale securities fraud. I would have thought that someone with just a tiny bit of morality would resign. Maybe next time this company lies or tries to commit fraud, that will be enough. So there's a possibility that will happen. The other thing is what happens to all frauds. Eventually, all frauds, like socialist governments, run out of other people's money. And by my calculations, it would be February 2019 at the very latest, at which point this company will be insolvent. So there are three potential endgames, but either way, it looks pretty bad for shareholders. MySquare is a wholesale fraud. I hope you now see why it's a wholesale fraud and why it's a scandal that it is still listed on AIM. Thank you very much for your time.